Good afternoon. My name is Hector Hernandez Morales, and I am the author of Politico's Living Cities Global Policy Lab, a project which examines Europeans' relationships with the cities in which they live. Today, we are going to discuss the future of the Green Deal in Europe, and very much the side that affects the people behind this monumentous transition that we're undergoing. Essentially, we want to ask who pays for the Green Deal? What are the social impacts that are going to come with this process? And what does that mean for our policy leaders? How are they preparing for the backlash that can come from such a monumental change in the way that we live, in the way that we experience life in Europe? So we would obviously like to welcome our on-site audience and our online audience and encourage you to participate in the debate that we're going to have. You can ask questions through the swap card platform, the instructions for which you can find on our event website. If you are already on the platform, feel free to chat with fellow attendees and ask questions in the question box to the right of the screen, and if you're on the desktop, and below the live stream if you're viewing the debate on your mobile phone. If you're joining us in person, Politico Live has provided you with flyers on which you can find instructions on how to use the swap card platform and ask questions. So I encourage you all to do that, and certainly to tweet with the hashtag Politico Sustainability. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers. So first of all, Diederik Samson. Diederik? Hi, Diederik. Diederik Samson is the head of cabinet for Executive Vice President for the Green Deal, Frans Timmermans, at the European Commission, followed by Bas Eickhout. Dutch MEP for the Greens. Thank you. And Bas, if you can just settle down over there. And finally, we have Wanda Boek, Vice President of the Management Board of PGE. Hi, Wanda. Thanks for joining us. You can go over there. So, oh, pardon me. So,
okay.
Bit of musical chairs.
Better for the image.
Indeed, indeed, indeed.
Okay.
So, without further ado, we'll just jump into it directly. So, first and foremost, we want to ask you guys, how can policymakers ensure that the transition to carbon neutrality doesn't leave anyone behind? And I think, Diederik, you're in the best position to start answering that question for us.
By accompanying this whole transition with a redistributional operation that we have never seen before. And that's actually the whole challenge of the Green Deal. The main challenge of the Green Deal and this transition is not the technology, it's there. Until a few months ago I said it's not the money, it's there. That's now going to be a little more complicated, as always. Free money doesn't exist. But the challenge of the Green Deal is the social dimension of it. So, as EVP Timmermans has said many times before, this needs to be a just transition, or there just will not be a transition. And that's been the past. That's been the same in every industrial revolution, big transition in the past. The main difference now is that the pace of this transition is so much faster than we've seen before. So the challenge to keep everyone on board, it's so much bigger than we've ever seen before. So that's why my answer is the redistributional operation that has to go hand in hand with this transition is enormous. And we've enshrined that in all of our legislation, or in the main parts of it, in the ETS, but obviously the Just Transition Fund, the Social Climate Fund. And we hope, but I can't say it with any certainty yet, but we hope and expect that that will do the trick. That will be the redistribution that is needed to keep everyone on board.
Okay, we'll come back to whether that redistribution will really cover everyone momentarily. But Bas, I want to jump to you from the parliamentary perspective. Do you agree with what Diederik said? Is the ambition here sufficient?
How can I disagree with Diederik, right? That's, and I think he put it very general, and I think we all agree. I mean, this is a huge redistributional challenge we're having, both within countries as between countries. And maybe I mean, in the Brussels setting, right, when we are here together in Brussels, you're used a bit that the European Parliament and then we'll criticize the European Commission. So I try not to do that today, because the biggest part of the challenge lies also in the national capitals. And I really think one of the fundamental problems we're having is that the Green Deal is still too much a Brussels project. And the only way to make this happen and to make this successful, if all 27 capitals are really on board and not just think, okay, Green Deal, that's Brussels and we do our own thing. Because a lot of the redistributional policies are in the hands of the national capitals. I mean, there's of course one big tool that politicians have when we talk about redistribution. It's called taxation. Well, that's national competence. And really, if we are, so I very much agree with Diederik, but that also means if we do not see taxation shifts that are badly needed in the EU, we will have a major problem. And that's not something that Diederik or I can solve. That's really into the national capitals. I think the Commission can be more vocal on it. For example, when the Commission was launching its energy taxation proposal, already at the presentation, you had the feeling they don't believe in it themselves. And I think that's really where we need to put the challenge to the capitals, because, for example, this energy taxation is so important, but it's stuck, as always, in the council, and that cannot happen. And basically, we should hammer that message home on a daily basis almost. And I think that's really lacking. So for me, we also really should talk about the responsibility of the member states and not only have this lovely Brussels debate here.
Well, and I'm going to turn to you in just a second, but I always want to take the opportunity to let two institutions gang up on the third. Diederik, what do you think could be done to get the council on board, to get the national capitals on board?
Well, that's a process that is much broader than getting the legislation, ramming it through their throat. They have to internalize it, and some are faster than others. I'm optimistic. You have this usual cliche rift between, so Western European countries have internalized it and Eastern European countries need to come a long way, etc. What I see in my conversations with countries like Slovakia, Czechia, Poland, and others, even Hungary, is that they start to internalize it much faster than, let's say, Germany or Western countries that we had somehow in mind as natural allies. But Bas is right. This will take much more energy than we have put to it right now. And actually, I almost feel caught red-handed with the Energy Taxation Directive, because, yes, that was maybe brought by the Commission with too little audacity, with as if we were almost sorry for proposing that. Yeah. And that's not the right mentality to get something through. I'm also, sadly, I'm also convinced that even if we had brought it with more audacity, it would still be stuck, but that's no excuse. So in the long term, this is a battle that we will lose many times in the short term, but in the end, we need to get through there, because taxation is an integral part of this. It should be, at least.
Though I can understand the complexity of going to a politician and encouraging them to raise taxes. Yeah. It's not an easy order to give, and especially coming from Brussels, I can assume that a lot of national politicians won't be delighted. But is there any country that you would spotlight as being particularly progressive, as being the model for the rest?
In terms of its rapid change, we are impressed by Slovakia, for instance. They, by the way, visited me this morning with a whole plan on carbon sequestration and creating a full holistic approach with biodiversity and soil health and things that you wouldn't expect from a country that is struggling with its economy at the moment. But they have it. They've set their minds to it. And unfortunately, the Hungarian Minister for Energy and Climate is now, he stepped down a few weeks ago, but he was a very promising figure. And he's one of the reasons that, I'm not going to comment on the Hungarian RRP in its full detail, but I can say something about the climate and energy part of it, and that was pretty good. I won't say anything about the other parts of the recovery and resilience, but the energy and climate part of it was pretty promising, was much more forthcoming than other countries that you would expect it from have brought forward.
Fair enough. Wanda, from the business side, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I have a lot. Well, the question is whether the Green Deal already hasn't left behind some of these actors. I mean, some of these capitals. I mean, obviously Poland. Speaking from a position of the biggest Polish energy company, which still has a significant share of lignite and hard coal in the portfolio, but also being the first Polish utility that announced green strategy and committed to green neutrality in 2050, we are gonna deliver more than 7 gigawatts in renewables within this decade and fully decarbonize our district heating systems. We are now in the position of a company that is struggling with EU ETS system that actually right now slowing down our green transition, because you are talking about redistribution. And always when I think about when I hear the redistribution talk, I have this kind of internal need to move this theoretical discussion to practical one. Actually, EU ETS system affects companies' liquidity on a daily basis. But and when we are discussing redistribution, we are talking about the future. But when the companies are struggling with also with an access to the capital, having still lignite and coal in their portfolios, we do struggle, and it's not only the issue of PGE, but other companies from region, not only from Poland, and that have every day limited, that we face the situation that the financial institutions don't want to finance our green transition, because we are not the companies that they are willing to borrow the money. Well, the question is how we're going to address this kind of issue, right? Because also Poland is a country that really speed up with the transition. We are very good. We are actually seeing recent reports. We are the second one when it comes to the speed of growth in photovoltaics. We have like significant share in heat pumps, but companies who want to invest into large-scale renewables have limited possibility because of the situation that we are now in.
Because of the EU ETS? Because
of the EU ETS, because of the lack of willingness of financial institutions to give us money, and so we don't have an access to the external capital. Actually, that was exactly what we discussed with Diedrich before our panel, that the only willingness funds the only willing funds to give us money are Chinese ones. So these are exactly those from this mentioned before during the previous panel, elephants in the room. So actually, I don't think that policymakers wanted owners of the European energy infrastructure to be put into the Chinese hands, into Chinese capital.
I see a lot of thoughts registering on Bas's face. I don't know if you if you want to give your own feedback.
Yeah, I still have to work on my poker face. Well, first of all, I mean, what ETS does is, of course, putting a price on carbon. So the more carbon intensive you are, the more it affects your liquidity. But that has to do something with the carbon intensity of your company, of course. I think that's also the idea, that we move away from carbon intense companies. And in that sense, we had a talk on, and then this complaint was already there when the carbon price was 80. It has gone down since then. And I think there are other issues as well, of course. I mean, what is a very fair point is the investors. But I think also here, what policymakers can do is, of course, stimulating through sustainable finance agenda to really push the investors to invest in those companies who have a credible a credible decarbonization plan. I think that's also, I mean, the direction to travel is very clear. That's climate neutrality.
Right.
That means a massive investment agenda. I think everyone is really honest about that. And any politician who will say that this transition will be an easy road is lying to the audience. And for example, Frans Timmermans, I think I can quote him literally that when he said it's going to be a hell of a job. And this means we need to put all the efforts in place, which means on sustainable finance, really getting the investors into a decarbonization path, the carbon pricing, but then of course, what do we do with the revenues? Also here again, I mean, Poland can't say, the government, the Polish government can't say that they get quite a lot of the revenues, both in innovation as in modernization, that they're maybe not then using that to the best extent. That is again my first point, that we also need to have a discussion with the capital, and I think that was also one of our conclusions when we had that talk. But also thirdly, and this is still a massive European challenge, we need a massive investment program.
Right.
A lot of investments need to go into the European industry to help them to transit away towards a carbon neutral economy. And this is of course somewhere where the European policymakers are not so good at, because this is not something you can only solve at the European level. We can go into the debate around social climate fund, the just transition fund, but let me now be a bit, you know, very cynical. Those are really minor funds if you look at the challenge. So at the European level, you can alleviate slightly, but that's in no way the investment need that is needed. And there, don't look to Brussels. Then you really again have to look to the 27 capitals who have much more capital at hand if they want to use it, and if they also want to combine that. Because I think that's the biggest challenge. We need countries that really cooperate together in a European approach, and that's lacking. And that's when investors then, of course, maybe turn to bigger economies in the world that do have a bigger a crowd to put out. And they're, of course, now looking at what the US is doing is what everyone is, it's everyone's mind at the moment.
Sure. Sure. Well, you've preempted my next question, which was which was absolutely about the social climate fund and about its weight within the just transition. So, Diederik, I'll give you an opportunity to address that one. How much of a component will it be, and do you agree with Bas that it's insufficiently funded, or that it doesn't have the scope that we really need to address the challenge?
Well, the social climate fund is designed to address the additional burden on low-income households due to the ETS2. It's actually calibrated so that it's 4 times the size that is needed for that specific purpose. So we have an oversized social climate fund, but that's only for this specific item within the whole transition and the justness of it. But it's a particular one. So while I argue that the social climate fund is fit for purpose, actually 4 times fit for purpose, it's at the same time too small to address the whole challenge. And Bas is right, much of that...
The scope is monumental.
The scope of the challenge as a whole is monumental, yes. So yes, you need capitals for that. Since the Green Deal and its design and the proposals on Fit for 55, we've obviously added a non-insignificant amount of money in the context of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is also a redistributional fund, because due to its distribution key, it lands more in countries that have less fiscal capacity themselves, and that's added value. So, but still then, with the Social Climate Fund and the Recovery and Resilience Facility and the Just Transition Fund, which was there first, you still need national policies to make this happen on every level. And addressing the Polish specific case and the trouble Poland has with the ETS, I think it's fair to say that part of that problem it originates from the original design of the ETS, or let's say the first overhaul of it in 2014, when indeed Poland got less than it was than it should have had, because of what happens in the end in the council, the horse trading over there. But that's only part of it. The other, and actually more bigger part of it, is due to the fact that the decarbonization of Poland has gone slower than other parts of Europe. So here's our deal. we're going to correct the first part, because that's our doing. So the new ETS will correct that because of the transfer of ETS allowances to Poland, the modernization fund, and maybe some other aspects. But that non-insignificant second part, the bigger part, that should be addressed by Poland itself. And guess what? They're doing that. Wanda already told you about the incredible amount of solar panels that is put down on roofs by normal citizens in Poland, which is not known for its sunny climate. Heat
and
pumps,
the pivot that they've made on wind as well.
Heat pumps, offshore wind, it's mind-boggling. So we are committed, if that's a real commitment from Poland, to help as much as we can to make that happen.
Wanda, I want to ask you, because you were mentioning the ETS, and I want to know specifically in the context of the ETS2 and on what people will, on the negative effects that many feel may come with it, especially for household consumers. Do you think the Social Climate Fund goes far enough to address?
No, absolutely not. And I do agree with what you said. You said, Bas, about you mentioned that you are cynical here, but actually you are not. You are saying the truth, because we counted it, and the investment gap when it comes to Poland that we counted before the war, so the number probably has changed, was 93 billion of euros. So. Till 2050, with counting all those like climate funds, modernization fund, all these potential money that are that will be available for Polish citizens and Polish companies. So still, it not gonna. There will be a huge gap, a huge investment gap. So the question is, who's gonna cover it? You expect the government.
Partly.
Part of it. So the second part probably will be the industry, and the third part probably will be citizens. So I don't know whether we're going to mention during our discussion the yellow jackets, but if you want to have a direct prescription how to generate resistance towards EU ETS and Green Deal, go for it. Like, just follow this path. From my perspective, and sorry, but I really need to address what was said previously. Is this
sure?
Okay, so. Actually, we have to remember that nowadays we are in a completely different situation than we were half a year ago when we spoke, because nowadays our policymakers expect from the companies like PG, not only to accelerate the green transition, but also to keep our conventional assets up and running, because we have to somehow in Europe make up the shortfall of the energy that when the substantial part of it suddenly gone. I mean the one based on Russian gas. So how are we gonna? Could you provide me the answer how we're going to navigate between those two expectations? Because I just don't know how to do it, openly speaking, right? Because whether we're gonna, if we want our conventional assets to generate energy, we will have to pay a lot of many euros for EU ETS allowances, and at the same time, with limiting our potential to speed up the green transition. Well, how to balance these two kind of expectation? If you have an excessive expectation toward the industry, just provide enough support for it.
Bas, any response to that, and also to the previous question? Yeah, there's a lot going on. Yeah.
Exactly. No,
why don't we start with this one?
Yeah. But first, of course, let's also be fair that the energy prices have gone up majorly, and some of the companies are profiting from that as well. So it's also a bit of a victimized role here to be taken, to be very honest. I mean, I think the biggest victims are the citizens who have to pay this huge energy price, and that's also exactly why we are having a debate how to compensate that, and that's exactly one of those discussions. But it's not that some of the energy companies are not making an excessive amount of profit also at this moment. So that there is, for example, talking about a just transition, that we are at the same time having a debate on maybe taxing the excessive profit is, I think, also a very logical and true debate that we need to have. And by the way, also there I find the proposals a bit too limited, because it's a one one-time off proposal, whereas I think we could discuss this as a more structural solution to some of the raising revenues, to be very honest. So that's back also again to the first point. I think when you were asking the other question, you were on ETS2, right? You want to, well, I don't think it's a secret that within the Parliament there's a huge discussion on ETS2 ongoing, and it's one of those lovely final items on the agenda when we are going into a long trilogue weekend somewhere half December. But I think there are two big concerns. The first is indeed, but it's narrowed down a bit too much always to the yellow jackets. I don't think that people are against a higher price on pollution, as long as they feel that it's being done in a just way. And that was, of course, one of the biggest problems back in France. I mean, taxation for the rich was lowered, while this was one of the first green taxations that Macron was proposing. That combination didn't go down well, and to be very honest, I understand very well why. So it's really also the justness, the fairness of the proposal needs to be very correctly. And here, indeed, what I'm a bit worried about is that maybe there is a bit of an overreach by the EU, and this is one of my criticisms. I know you talk to many individual MEPs and you will get many different reasons why they're critical on ETS2. For me, it's also a bit the fear that what Europe is doing is putting a price on carbon, which of course can put in some of the signals that we need, putting a price on pollution. However, then how to make sure that indeed there is a socially just compensation, and there, I mean, when you said, Diederik, it's covering 4 times, it's very much on how you define the most vulnerable people, right? And I think that definition needs to be adjusted if you look at the current energy prices. So in that sense, it's a too blunt statement on talking about it's 4 times delivering, because I think the number of people who are having problems with the current energy prices have become much bigger. You can't solve that all with the Social Climate Fund, I'm very well aware, but I mean, this is added on top of a concern that is there already. But I think the second problem is that a lot of these revenues that on top of that will go to the national member states. We need to then hope that they will put it in the right place. Again, back to the capitals. Right. I don't see that happening. And I think what also can happen is that a lot of member states will kind of, now all the sectors are being covered by a pricing mechanism by Brussels. We don't have to do anything anymore. So you are also stimulating a bit of a kind of the blame game that you already see happening in Hungary.
Sure.
Where it's just Orban blaming Brussels for all the problems you have, and you can lean backwards. And that play, we should not make it too easy to the capitals, and that also goes a bit back to my first point. And by putting everything in an ETS, I'm a bit worried for that.
Diederik?
Well, well, first of all, on the blame game, it's part of the division of labor, and it's partly the reason why Europe is moving forward, because we provide cover for national politicians that are not courageous enough to say it was their own idea. Then we provide them with an alibi to say, well, it was also Brussels. I fully agree.
That's a double-edged.
I fully agree that that's a fragile balance, and Hungary is threading that with well. Manifestly, so that's obviously we have to keep that in mind. So it is a valid argument to use and the so-called overreach. But on the ETS2 and the Social Climate Fund, but well, bear with me for a minute. The total turnover of the ETS2 is 40 billion, and it's very clear. So the total energy bill, heating and transport bill for Europeans will increase with 40 billion. That's well, clear mathematics. Half of that is companies. Good luck with that. Half of it is households. Let's take half of those households. They use a quarter of the energy. Poor households don't own a car. Poor households have smaller houses. They use a quarter of the energy, and I want to compensate all of them. So I want to compensate half of the European households for the energy, for the price increase due to the ETS2. You need 1/8 of the money. It's there. It's there. It's valid. And indeed, you could say, well, I don't trust member states to address it, so or to provide money to the right people. So we are going to prescribe that, which is also a part of the overreach dilemma. But still, we're going to prescribe that. But even if we wouldn't, capitals are, at least European capitals, are democratic and democratically governed, and they are under the same amount of pressure as we are to create a just transition. And maybe they're better equipped at some point to create that just transition because they have taxation at hand. I'm not too worried about this part of our proposals because we have that covered, literally.
I want to touch upon an issue that all of you guys have mentioned at one point or another, which is the specter of the Yellow Vest movement, and you went into detail there. In the midst of the war in Ukraine and with inflation going absolutely wild, what can the EU do, and what would you like to see national governments do to ensure that this transition is as just as possible and that we keep advancing toward the Green Deal goals?
Yeah, because the situation that we are in right now calls for, shouts, not just calls for, a faster transition than anticipated. That's clear. I mean, we need to move faster out of fossil fuels, especially Russian gas, so the transition needs to go faster. So the challenge of creating a just transition is getting bigger. That's very simple and very difficult at the same time. And we need to address that in the best possible way. We are only starting to grapple with that reality, but you can see already national governments addressing this by distributing no less than 500 billion euros on a yearly basis to compensate households and also companies, by the way, for the increased energy prices. And one thing is very clear, that's not a sustainable way of solving the problem. You can't spend 500 billion euros each year to compensate a too high energy price. So the real solution is actually very straightforward. It's lower your demand, increase other supply than Russian gas. And we're doing both at the fastest pace possible. And even at the fastest pace possible, it will take us 3 to 4 years to make it happen. So it's going to be three very difficult winters. That's clear. We've covered the first. Don't ask at what price, but we've covered the first in terms of energy. We now are starting to plan for the second, which will be the most difficult one. The third will be about as difficult as this one, and then we might be out of it. That's the plan, and we have to execute that plan as disciplined as possible, because every day that we don't do anything will be a day longer in this crisis.
Juan, I want to turn to you on the business side. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I do enjoy your conversation, which was mostly about like throwing the ball from the European level to national level. I think that both national governments and also European policymakers have role to play in this. But as you know, it's national regulation and national support and national communication very important here, but also please don't tell me that EU ETS doesn't play a significant role here. For example, you probably don't know, but our financial results are publicly available. Last year, we've paid 2 billion euros for EU ETS allowances, which was equal to our EBITDA. So it's very significant tool. It's a very significant tool that affects industry on a daily basis. So that was to address the final words of yours.
Bas, same question that has been given to all three.
On the yellow
correct, yeah.
Well, I think I addressed that already, but...
but is there anything else that you would like to see, or is there anything, if you were able to give direct advice, for example, to national leaders who have to implement this stuff, how do you do this in a fair manner that isn't, what we saw in France? Is it essentially that this really does need to be equal taxation, top to bottom?
No, I think it's obviously clear that the current energy prices are a big concern for everyone, and that's also, of course, where, for example, the coming council is going to fight over till the late hours probably. I think there are proposals on the table that can really make a difference. If I refer back to the winters that are coming, that Diederik was mentioning, it's very clear that one of the solutions in order to lower the price for just filling up our reserves is, of course, by doing that together at the European level.
Sure.
Because it's also very clear that why was it costing so much money is because countries were bidding against each other. And that was creating a huge price peak for the gas that then has been filled in the reservoirs. And there, being a bit critical to Germany and the Netherlands, they first filled up their reservoirs and then said, maybe we should do that together. You know, the timing of that proposal, I can understand very well why some other member states were a bit, you know, taken with some emotions when they were saying that. But nevertheless, putting the timing aside, this is one of the key proposals at the table for the coming winter. I mean, we need to prepare for that, and the current prices are way too high, but the way to get that lower is by working together as European countries. Every time when every country is coming up with solutions by its own, then we are creating a problem. And I think that is also really something that we should tell. This is not to throw the ball at the national corner, because yes, we have to do it together, but I think there are quite some issues and at least potential solutions on the table, but they need to be agreed on, they need to be worked at, and they may need to be implemented. All that in a huge pace of change that we are looking at. So I think we are all very well aware of the challenges that we're having, but I do think that quite some of the proposals are now out there, and also the Commission, I'm looking very much forward, will come with a proposal of also a kind of a new energy market where, of course, the way we have been constructing that was maybe logical 5 years ago, but with the current prices and the differences between gas and electricity, that is a concern, but it's also not that easy to address that in times of crisis when the energy market is, of course, full agile, I would say. So we need to address that also, and the Commission will do that as well. So I do think that from Brussels there's a lot of potential solutions thrown at the table, but now we need to start agreeing and implementing them, and that's I think where now the biggest challenges will be.
Is part of, and this we have to answer very, very briefly because we're almost out of time, is part of this challenge also acknowledging that inevitably some people are going to be left behind? Are we being way too optimistic in saying that the EU and national governments are going to be able to take care of everyone? Or do you firmly believe that it really is a possibility?
If we talk about people, I firmly believe we need to take everyone along. Mm-hmm. I don't think, and that is really, I don't think that all the current industry that we're having in Europe will be there in 30 years' time. We have to be honest about that.
Maybe Chinese will be.
No, it can be European. It depends on an investment.
So.
No, yeah, but that's exactly why I want a European investment plan and say that we need to do much more there. Mm-hmm. Because I want to prevent that in the end it's then foreign money taking over. But it's still very clear that the transition means that there is a huge transition in the different sectors, and there will be, of course, victims. I mean, this is a transition that will have victims, but that should never be vulnerable citizens, and that we can also prevent if we want to. So there I really make a clear distinction.
Wanda, very quickly.
Well, I'm afraid that there will be some countries left behind. There will be some citizens left behind as well, and for sure some actors on this industry level as well.
And finally, Diederik.
This transition is painful. And that will be felt also by citizens, but we have a responsibility, and I think we can live up to that responsibility to take citizens along. And I agree that for companies, it's what actually the essence of a company is to look at the future, take a risk, jump into that future, and survive, or even more than thrive. And I'm not worried about Poland at all. To be honest. I mean, we visited one of the new startup companies in Warsaw making perovskites, which is the holy grail of the new generation of solar cells. And it's actually, if you look at a place where that's happening in Europe, it's happening in Warsaw, Poland. And even your own company, Ms. Boek, your own company is investing big time. I could say finally, but no, it's happening. It's big time in solar, in offshore wind. The potential is enormous. The people in Poland are working more hours a week than many countries in the western parts of Europe. They are better educated in terms of technical skills and professions. I have no reason to worry about countries. If we take our job seriously and we stay together as a union, we can make this transition happen.
Okay, well, on that optimistic note, we'll have to leave it there. I want to thank all three of you for coming. Diederik, Wanda, Bas, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You can head that way, and if you guys will stay seated, in just a few minutes we'll move on to our next panel discussion. It'll be an interview that I'll have with Dr. Carlos Moreno on decarbonizing cities. So stick around. Thank you guys very much.